The Lost Workshop of Saint Nick. Chapter 1, Winter Wonderland. The first flakes of snow drifted lazily from the gray December sky, dusting the quaint town of Yuletide Hollow in a fine layer of powdery white. The winding cobblestone streets and peaked rooftops were blanketed in the season's first snowfall, transforming the charming village into a magical winter wonderland. Inside one of the cozy cottages on Gingerbread Lane, 12-year-old Emily Wintergreen pressed her nose against the frost-covered windowpane, her warm breath fogging the glass as her bright green eyes widened with delight. "It's snowing," she exclaimed, her high-pitched voice brimming with enthusiasm. Emily darted outside, nearly tripping over the braided holiday rug in her excitement. She didn't even bother to grab a coat, hat, gloves, or boots to protect her from the wintry weather. The icy snow crunched beneath her pink polka-dot slippered feet as she tilted her head back, mouth open trying to catch the falling flakes on her tongue. The snowflakes melted as soon as they hit the heat of her breath, leaving a chilly tingle on her taste buds. She reveled in the tranquil hush that had settled over Yuletide Hollow, broken only by the faint jingling of sleigh bells in the distance. It seemed the entire village was still fast asleep, unaware of the magical winter transformation taking place right outside their windows. Wandering down the snowy lane, Emily brushed her mittenless fingers along the freshly adorned lampposts and fences, leaving meandering trails of handprints in her wake. Icicles dangled from the eaves like crystalline wind chimes, capturing and refracting the pale morning sunlight into miniature rainbows that danced across the snowy ground. The sky overhead was a muted palette of pearly gray, hints of sunrise pink just barely visible along the horizon through gaps in the heavy snow clouds. Emily's cheeks flushed rosy red as the bracing air nipped at her exposed skin. She was used to the bitter chill of Yuletide Hollow winters, having lived here her entire life, so she hardly noticed the numbness creeping into her toes or the way her breath crystallized into misty puffs with each exhale. There was a nip of magic in the air that filled Emily with inexplicable joy, a scent of gingerbread and fresh pine needles mingling with the cool winter breeze. The snowfall steadily progressed from scattered flurries to fat, fluttering flakes that accumulated with astonishing speed. Before long, a plush white blanket of snow reached Emily's ankles, muffling the sounds of the slumbering village. It was as if the world had been placed under a spell, tranquil and hushed except for the rhythmic crunch of Emily's footsteps. Emily's senses were ignited with childlike euphoria. She stuck out her tongue, giggling each time a snowflake landed on the tip and melted instantly. The icy pinpricks barely registered through her building excitement. Something about this first snowfall felt undeniably magical to Emily. It was the official start of the Christmas season, her very favorite time of year. As the morning sun crested over the distant Sugarplum Mountains, its pale wintry light filtered through the dense snow clouds, bathing Yuletide Hollow in an ethereal glow. The candles and oil lamps in the windowsills flickered to life one by one as the villagers awoke, welcoming the holiday season like the lighting of an advent calendar. Emily hugged her arms around herself, overwhelmed by a sense of wonder and possibility. "I just know something magical is going to happen this Christmas," Emily whispered into the silent, snowy air. The wind carried her voice through the snow-laced pines of the nearby wintry woods. Between the barren branches, a crumbling Gothic tower could be glimpsed in the distance, though no one in Yuletide Hollow had ventured near it for years. Emily decided to build a snowman to celebrate the first snowfall. She carefully rolled 3 large snowballs of varying sizes, stacking them to assemble a lumpy snowman that reached her shoulder. Using sticks for arms, pebbles for eyes and mouth, and a leftover Halloween witch hat to top it off, she created a quirky snowman that made her grin with pride. Emily danced merrily around her snowman, imagining it coming to life, though she knew that only happened in the movies. She twirled and leaped, leaving a maze of footprints across the yard. The snow was falling heavily now, erasing her tracks within minutes. The wind picked up speed, whistling through the barren tree branches and stirring up eddies of snowflakes. Shivering, Emily decided she should go back inside for some hot cocoa to warm herself up. Her clothes were damp, her fingers stiff and frozen. She took one more long look around at the snow-covered village, breathing in the magical sight, before reluctantly turning toward home. That's when she heard it, a faint jingling sound, like sleigh bells, coming from the direction of the woods. She paused, listening intently, but it was gone. With a shrug, she skipped back to the cozy cottage, leaving the snowman standing sentry in the yard. Inside, the smell of gingerbread and cinnamon welcomed her. Emily peeled off her wet socks and shoes, wiggling her half-frozen toes by the roaring fireplace until feeling returned. She couldn't stop thinking about that intriguing sound from the woods. What could it have been? For now, she tried to push the curiosity aside as she warmed up with a cup of hot cocoa piled high with marshmallows. The snow continued falling steadily outside, casting a hushed spell over the snug cottage, as Emily daydreamed about what unexpected Christmas magic might be in store this year. Chapter 2: The Hidden Entrance. Emily wandered along the snow-covered lane, happily humming a jaunty holiday tune to herself. She absently traced her finger through the fresh powder collecting on fences and benches, leaving meandering trails behind her. The icy crystals clung to her wool mittens as she aimlessly dragged them along. Up ahead, she spotted a brightly painted signpost pointing towards the wintry woods. The sign creaked in the winter wind, swaying ever so slightly. Though parents often warned their children to steer clear of the shadowy forest, Emily's curiosity got the better of her. She strayed from the shoveled path and delved into the woods, trudging through nearly knee-deep snow. With each step, her boots sank down into the crunchy white fluff. The scent of pine hung heavy in the air as fat snowflakes continued their gentle descent through the barren canopy overhead. They collected in Emily's hair and eyelashes as she trekked deeper into the woods. The cold barely registered through Emily's shearling-lined boots and wool coat. A tingle of intrigue coursed through her at the thought of exploring somewhere new and mysterious. As she ventured deeper amongst the skeletal trees, they clustered ever tighter together as if to deter her progress. Their spindly branches were adorned with crystalline icicles that resembled jagged fangs, glistening dangerously. Just when the woods had grown so dense with trees that she thought she could go no farther, Emily stumbled into a clearing. Her eyes widened in awe at the crumbling tower that loomed before her, enshrouded in swirling snow. The ancient stones were caked in ice, causing the structure to sparkle. Frost crept across the cracked window panes in intricate patterns, obscuring whatever might lie within. Emily glanced around cautiously before approaching the ancient stone edifice, as if afraid someone might be watching her. She ran her mittened hand across the weathered wooden door, its hinges and fittings long rusted over from decades of neglect. Gripping the wrought iron handle, icy cold to the touch, Emily tugged with all her might. The unyielding door groaned in protest but gave way under her persistence, opening just enough for her slip inside. A rush of icy air hit her face as Emily crossed the threshold into the shadowy tower, both unnerving and exhilarating her. She called out a tentative hello, but was met only by the echoes of her own voice against the mildewed stone walls. Chilled to the bone yet too curious to turn back, Emily pressed onward up the spiral staircase. As she ascended floor after floor, she trailed her hand along the curved wall, fingertips tracing the strange symbols etched upon its surface. Their meaning eluded her, though they appeared ancient and mysterious, unlike any alphabet Emily had seen. Just when the stairwell had narrowed to nearly a crawl space, it opened up into a cavernous chamber. Emily gasped in disbelief at the sight before her. Beneath the tower's conical roof sat what appeared to be a forgotten Christmas workshop. Dusty bundles of toys spilled from appended sacks and silent assembly lines sat frozen in time, as if the workers had simply vanished. Mid-shift. Most wondrous of all was the enormous crystal bell suspended from the ceiling's apex, glinting and refracting prismatic rainbows across the walls and Emily's astonished face. "What is this place?" Emily wondered aloud, her voice echoing eerily around her. She had stumbled upon what was unmistakably Santa's lost workshop, a fabled place thought to exist only in legend. Emily could hardly believe her eyes, and wondered if she was dreaming. But the bitter cold reminded her she was very much awake, and had found something inexplicable. Chapter 3: Unleashing the Spirits. Emily slowly circled the perimeter of the abandoned workshop, trailing her fingers along the cold metal railings of lifeless assembly lines that stretched on endlessly into the dark recesses of the cavernous building. She peered into the face of each incomplete toy that lay strewn haphazardly across the conveyor belts, half expecting their vacant eyes to suddenly turn towards her. But the only sound was the howling and moaning of the frigid winter wind outside the frost-encrusted windows high above that sent icy drafts swirling down from the rafters. Beneath the towering crystal bell sat a dust-blanketed worktable, the edges piled high with scraps of fabric and coils of ribbon. Emily reached out and gently brushed the surface clean, clouds of fine particulate matter swirling up and making her cough as years of accumulated dust were disturbed. Blinking through watery eyes, she discovered the remains of an unfinished ice sculpture laying amidst the debris. Its features were crudely chiseled, suggesting the unsteady hand of an apprentice still learning the finer details of their craft. As Emily examined the sculpture, its grooved mouth and sightless, sunken eyes, she was struck by the peculiar, almost sinister shape of its face. There was something deeply unsettling in its expression that sent a chill down her spine, unrelated to the frigid tower air that bit at her skin. She hastily covered it again with a moth-eaten rag, as if worried the figure might suddenly spring to life beneath her touch. Just then, a mournful sound reverberated through the stillness, the tinkling notes of a music box. Emily whirled around, her breath freezing in her chest as she searched for the source, until she spotted a glimmer from the far corner of the dusty workshop. Inside a small glass case carved with swirling snowflakes sat a glinting silver carousel with prancing reindeer circling endlessly, straining against their frozen poses. As the last strained notes played, echoing eerily across the cavernous space, Emily sensed a deeper change in the very air around her. The shadows themselves seemed to lengthen and stretch their reach towards her, crawling slowly across the floor like gnarled fingers. I should go," Emily stammered to the emptiness, her own voice sounding small and afraid against the vastness of the abandoned tower. She turned to flee down the creaking stairs but paused at the sight of the towering crystal bell looming high above her. Some irresistible urge compelled her to reach out and brush its smooth, icy surface with her bare fingertips. The bell let out the faintest vibration in response, like the groan of a sleeper slowly waking from a long slumber. Emily watched in horror as a hairline fracture appeared beneath her fingers and rapidly splintered outward until the intricate bell shattered into gleaming shards, tinkling musically as they rained down and scattered across the stone floor around her feet. She gasped, stumbling backward, as amorphous forms seemed to rise like black mist in the spaces between the fractured crystal. Ghostly shapes took form, writhing shadows hovering at the edge of her vision before vanishing again into the darkness. "What have I done?" Emily whispered, the blood draining from her face as the terrifying realization dawned on her. She sensed this lost, forgotten place had once held the spirits of Christmas captive in its relics and traditions. But now, she had carelessly unleashed something far more malevolent back into the world. Chapter 4: Friends Unite. Emily burst through her front door, the heavy oak slab slamming against the wall with a thunderous crash that shook the windows, as if she were a woman possessed, pursued by some unseen demonic entity. Her hands trembled as she turned the lock, her skin cold and clammy with nervous sweat, eyes darting around the entryway warily. She slumped back against the solid door in palpable relief at being safely ensconced within the secure walls of home. That was, until she noticed her little brother Tommy sitting halfway up the staircase, staring down at her quizzically, a candy cane dangling loosely from his mouth. "Why are you home from Peter's so soon?" Tommy asked around the peppermint stick, his words slightly muffled and indistinct. Emily hesitated, twisting her friendship bracelet around her wrist, as she realized she had impulsively raced home rather than confiding in her two closest friends, Peter and Sarah, about the disturbing events that had sent her fleeing from the woods. "Oh, we decided to finish the snow fort tomorrow," she fibbed unconvincingly, forcing brightness into her tone as she ruffled her brother's sandy hair in passing on her way upstairs. Tommy gave her a dubious look but didn't press the issue as his sister rushed up to her room, shutting the door quickly behind her. Once safely alone, Emily began to pace, her footsteps falling rapidly across the floorboards, biting her nails down to the quick. She thought back to the strange visions and chilling sounds that had emanated from the hidden workshop deep in the winter woods. Had she really unleashed vengeful spirits upon the world, or was it all just a product of her overactive imagination? She wished she had Peter's logic and rationality or Sarah's calm intuition to help her make sense of the uncanny events and reach an explanation, whether mundane or supernatural in origin. Glancing out her frosty windowpane, Emily noticed two familiar figures walking down the snowy lane, leaving a trail of footprints behind them. It was Peter and Sarah, bundled in colorful wool hats and scarves, returning from the hot cocoa stand in the town square. Before she could second-guess herself, Emily impulsively grabbed her warmest winter coat and a knitted Ravenclaw scarf and raced back outside into the cold to intercept her friends. "Hey Emily, want to help me test out my snow catapult prototype when we get back?" asked Peter brightly as she ran up to them, cheeks flushed from the chill. But Emily just grabbed both of their arms urgently, ignoring the question. "You guys have to come with me right now," she whispered, looking around furtively as if afraid of being overheard. Bewildered by her behavior, Peter and Sarah exchanged a concerned glance but allowed themselves to be led away by Emily, their boots crunching through the fresh fallen snow. She brought them to a secluded grove of tall pine trees, sheltered from view of the lane, before finally stopping and turning to face them. Once safely hidden away from prying eyes, Emily told them the whole story in a rush, finding the forgotten, cobweb-covered workshop deep in the winter woods just outside of town, impulsively opening the door to peer inside, and the darkness and icy chill that seemed to escape from within to envelop her. She described the strange visions and sounds that had led her to believe she may have accidentally unleashed malevolent spirits upon Yuletide Hollow. "You really think you released ghosts or something?" Sarah asked, and Emily had finished her tale, looking thoughtful as she readjusted her hand-knit hat. Peter furrowed his brow skeptically at the idea, but sensing Emily's genuine fear and panic, he kept an open mind. "I know it sounds crazy, but I felt this presence," Emily insisted, running her hands up and down her arms as if to ward off a phantom chill only she could perceive. "Will you guys please help me try to figure this out?" Peter and Sarah shared a concerned look between them before turning back to Emily and nodding. "Of course we'll help," said Sarah kindly, giving her friend a comforting hug. "Whatever is really going on here, we'll get to the bottom of it together." "Yeah, don't worry, we've got your back," Peter reassured, squeezing Emily's shoulder bracingly. Emily sighed in deep relief, extremely thankful in that moment to have such loyal, steadfast friends she could always count on to support her and face challenges by her side. With Peter and Sarah's help, she felt emboldened and determined to venture back to that eerie abandoned workshop and uncover the true source of the lurking evil she feared had been unleashed upon her beloved town of Yuletide Hollow. Chapter 5, Into the Workshop. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Peter whispered doubtfully as the three friends trudged through the snowy forest. The trees were ancient and gnarled, their intertwining branches forming a foreboding canopy overhead that blocked out the late afternoon sun. Emily nodded resolutely, forging a path through the knee-deep snow. "We just have to keep heading towards the old tower. It should be close." The crumbling spire soon loomed before them, rising above the barren trees like a giant stone finger. Sarah clutched her woolen scarf tighter against the biting wind, her hazel eyes troubled. "Remember, we stick together no matter what," she cautioned as they approached the imposing edifice. "No splitting up." Emily pushed open the heavy oak door, the rusted iron hinges creaking loudly in protest. The three friends huddled close together as they entered the musty dimness within. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the dust-laden air as they ascended the tight spiraling staircase, shoulders scraping the curved stone walls. Each groan of the old timber made them jump, their nerves on edge. Emily's heart raced faster the higher they climbed. She kept expecting an icy hand at any moment to reach out from the shadows and grab them. But they miraculously made it to the top unaccosted. The stairwell finally opened up into the cavernous chamber that was the wizard's lost workshop. Emily froze in the doorway, the color draining from her face. "That old sheet wasn't covering the table before," she whispered. "And I know for a fact that I left that music box open." Sarah and Peter exchanged an uneasy look. The very air felt heavier somehow, oppressive, as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. Emily stepped further into the room, the ancient floorboards creaking loudly underfoot. Her eyes landed on the large crystal bell lying shattered across the floor. But instead of scattered shards, the bell was now perfectly intact. Emily's eyes widened in alarm and her friends noticed her shocked reaction. "What's wrong?" Peter asked worriedly. "It's almost like this place is resetting itself," Emily said slowly, a chill running down her spine that had nothing to do with the frigid tower air. Suddenly, the decrepit toys lining the shelves jerked to life, slowly swiveling their heads in unison towards the intruders. Their glass eyes glowed an ominous red as they began shambling stiffly forward. Sarah let out a terrified scream as the three friends clung to each other. The workshop was alive once more, and they were trespassing. They had to get out, now. Emily's mind raced, thinking of the quickest escape route. The window. She grabbed Peter and Sarah's hands, making a beeline for the sole window in the chamber. They had to hurry before the sinister toys blocked their path. Chapter 6: Haunted Entities. Peter, Emily, and Sarah huddled together as the grotesque toys closed in, impossibly given life. Their appendages jerked with unnatural motion, eyes glassy and vacant. Sarah trembled uncontrollably, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Emily squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," Emily murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. She wasn't sure she believed her own words, but she had to be strong for Sarah. The possessed toys were unlike anything they had ever seen, like nightmares made flesh. One doll with cracked porcelain skin and tangled yarn hair turned its head with an awful creaking noise, fixing its stare on them. Emily suppressed a shudder. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The toys were within striking distance now. Their lifeless eyes bored into the trio as they shambled closer. Peter shifted into a defensive stance, ready to push the girls behind him. But the expected attack never came. The toys halted just inches away, swaying eerily as if held back by some invisible force. "Why aren't they getting us?" Peter wondered aloud, not daring to lower his guard. Before Emily could hazard a guess, a bone-chilling laugh pierced the stillness, making them jump. They turned in unison towards the sound. A shadowy form detached itself from the surrounding darkness. It writhed at the edges like black flame, two pinpoints of searing white light burning where its eyes should be. "What a touching display of camaraderie," the shadow hissed, its voice dripping with malicious mockery. "It will make severing your friendship all the more delicious." Sarah's face hardened with determination. She instinctively drew an ancient rune in the air before them. "Shield us from darkness with light," she cried out. A shimmering, pearlescent dome materialized around the friends. The shadow let out an awful, screeching wail as if burned. It recoiled violently from the protective barrier. A light bearer protects them. We cannot touch them, for now, it seethed. Before their eyes, the shadow dissolved into wisps of inky black smoke, vanishing into the surrounding gloom. The possessed toys immediately collapsed like puppets with their strings abruptly cut. "How did you do that?" Emily gasped, staring at Sarah in awe. Sarah gave a bewildered shrug, looking just as shocked. I just felt like I had to," she stammered. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, amazed by Sarah's inner power yet wary of the shadow's threat. They could all sense this was far from over. Strengthened by the light, they pressed deeper into the spectral workshop, certain that the way to stop the malevolent entity's evil presence lay hidden somewhere within. Chapter 7: The Crystal Bell. Beyond the main chamber, Peter, Sarah, and Emily wandered through a maze of smaller rooms cluttered with ancient tools and manuals. Peter's flashlight cast dancing shadows across the stone walls as they delved deeper into the ancient temple. In one room, Peter's light glinted off something crystalline. Brushing aside cobwebs, he revealed a glass case housing what looked like alchemists' tools, vials, knives, and a mortar and pestle. "I think this was some kind of laboratory," Peter murmured. He opened a large leather-bound book resting nearby. Its brittle pages were filled with formulas and arcane symbols. Meanwhile, Emily investigated a workbench holding metalworking tools, hammers, pliers, engraving blades. Tracing her fingers over the engraver's fine tip, her mind turned to the intricate silver bell they had found, remembering the hypnotic power it held over her. At the back of the workshop, Sarah blew dust off a massive tome bound in fraying leather. As she carefully opened it, her eyes widened. "Peter, Emily, look at this." The book's pages were filled with detailed schematics depicting a smooth crystalline orb suspended within a bell. Converging beams of light radiated into the orb from many meticulously cut facets. "It's the crystal bell," Peter realized, awestruck. "These must be the plans for how it was constructed." Emily studied the pages over his shoulder. "It's like the bell was designed to be some kind of prism." Her mind flashed back to the sensation of her fingers brushing the bell's smooth surface right before it shattered. "A prism for spirits," Sarah whispered. "It has to be meant to trap or contain them." Her eyes lit up as the pieces came together. That's why breaking it unleashed the shadow, the bell was imprisoning it. Peter nodded, excitement kindling within him. "So if we can restore the bell, we may be able to trap the shadow again." With renewed hope, the trio hurried back to the cavernous central chamber. But as they examined the silver bell's empty frame, surrounded by shards scattered across the dusty floor, their excitement dimmed. The damage looked beyond repair. "There must be some way," Emily said desperately, sifting through broken crystal pieces. But the more she searched, the clearer it became: too many fragments were missing or unrecognizable. Restoring the intricate bell seemed impossible. As the friends sank into despair, a new sound arose, the slow, rhythmic jangling of chains. From the chamber's darkest corner, a hunched figure emerged, ragged cloak dragging, with lengths of heavy chain clanking behind it along the floor. Beneath its tattered cowl, they could glimpse only shifting shadows where its face should be. Sarah tensed, ready to invoke a protective rune. But the cloaked creature raised one gnarled, skeletal hand in a peaceful gesture. "Stay your magic, Lightbearer," it rasped, its voice low and hollow. "I mean you no harm. I, too, suffered long enslavement by the shadow, until you came and shattered the bell that bound us." The trio exchanged uneasy glances. Could this really be an ally, and not some new threat? The figure shuffled closer, chains scraping the floor. "You have broken the shadow's bonds, but also unleashed his darkness unchecked," it continued grimly. "If he regains full strength, both our worlds are doomed." Only you now possess the power to restore what has been broken, before it is too late. It raised its face towards Sarah, though nothing could be seen in its void black depths. Will you rise to meet this challenge, Lightbearer? Sarah bit her lip, feeling the weight of this choice press upon her. So much was uncertain. But as she steadied her breathing, she knew there was only one path forward. She stepped toward the ruined bell with resolve. Tell me what I must do. Chapter 8, Showdown with the Shadow. Sarah stepped forward and held her hands over the scattered crystal shards. She didn't know exactly how, but she could sense energy flowing within and around every living thing. Here it felt subdued, the space heavy with lingering despair that pressed down on her like a physical weight. She closed her eyes and focused on kindling a small but bright spark of hope in her heart. Sarah imagined that light flowing down her arms in rejuvenating rays, filling her palms with warmth. Her hands began to glow faintly, pulsing with gathering energy. The crystal pieces trembled on the floor, then slowly rose into the air as if magnetically drawn. They reassembled into a flawless bell, gleaming with renewed brilliance that lit up the shadowy corners of the workshop. A bone-chilling screech suddenly thundered through the room as the shadow erupted violently from the darkness. It towered over them, writhing and swirling as it cried, "You will not banish me again." Inky black tendrils lashed out from its amorphous form, striking Sarah and knocking her roughly aside. She hit the floor hard, the wind knocked out of her. The crystal bell teetered precariously, threatening to shatter once more into useless fragments. Emily and Peter rushed forward without hesitation to catch the bell before it could fall. They struggled to keep the surprisingly heavy crystal aloft between them. "We have to get it back up where it belongs," Peter cried over the wailing shadows. The air turned frigid around them as the shadow swirled faster, battering them relentlessly with its icy assault. Emily gritted her teeth against the cold, willing her numbing fingers not to lose their grip. Just as their strength gave out, spectral forms began to pour from the very walls around them, disembodied ghostly helpers summoned to their aid. The spirits lifted the bell effortlessly from Emily and Peter's shaking hands and raised it high overhead. As the bell ascended, the crystalline streams of light reignited within it, focusing into a powerful beam through the central orb. The shadow screeched in impotent fury, writhing like a cornered beast attempting to avoid the purifying light. "Now, Sarah! Do it now!" Emily yelled encouragement over the howling darkness. Sarah locked determined eyes with the roiling form of the shadow and drew a series of glowing blue runes in the air before her. They flared brightly, then a blinding flash erupted from her hands, engulfing the shadow completely in its white heat. The shadow let out a despairing wail that turned into an echoing shriek before fading away into silence. Only the bell's soft, melodious tone remained. As the light from Sarah's banishment spell dissipated, the workshop around them transformed. The tools and toys gleamed once more, restored to their former state of well-cared-for glory. The ghostly helpers murmured their gratitude before vanishing peacefully into the ether. Even the chained creature bowed deeply in thanks before its spirit also disappeared. Peter and Emily both hurried to help an exhausted Sarah back up to her feet. They exchanged awed and relieved laughter, giddy with triumph after surviving the harrowing ordeal and freeing the captive spirits from the shadow's cruel influence. But as the trio turned to leave the workshop and make their way outside, a gentle tinkling sound gave them pause. There atop an old work table sat a gleaming silver carousel with intricately carved reindeer parading around and around in an endless circle. Its familiar melody filled the room, signifying that the true spirit of holiday generosity had finally returned to Yuletide Hollow. Chapter 9, Sealing the Spirits. Emily lay wide awake in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. Sleep felt impossible after the harrowing events of the day. Her mind raced as she replayed every chilling moment, the finding of the abandoned workshop, the discovery of the enchanted crystal bell, and most terrifying of all, the confrontation with the ominous shadow. Emily shuddered as she recalled the shadow's icy breath and soul-piercing whispers. She had barely escaped its grasp, saved only by the brilliant flare of light from the bell. But the shadow still lurked out there somewhere, hungering to corrupt anyone it could reach. Emily knew she needed to seal the bell's power away, to protect both it and the town from the preying darkness. But the mere thought of facing the shadow again made her pulse quicken in fear. As the old clock downstairs struck midnight, its bells jolted Emily from her spiraling thoughts. In the silence that followed, a new sound reached her ears, the merry jingling of sleigh bells. Emily slipped out of bed and crept to the window, pushing the frost-lined panes open. Outside, the street below was transformed. A blanket of shimmering white snow covered the ground, reflecting the starry sky. And gliding silently over the snow were dozens of miniature sleighs, each no bigger than a loaf of bread. The sleighs were pulled by tiny reindeer with velvet hooves, their plumes of breath whisking into the cold air. But most mystifying of all were the sleighs' drivers, gnome-sized figures bundled in fur-trimmed red, their flowing beards frosted white with ice. As one of the spectral sleighs floated down to land on the snow beneath Emily's window, the tiny driver looked up at her with a twinkle in his ancient eyes. He raised a mittened hand and beckoned. Heart pounding, Emily slipped on boots and a coat and crept outside into the mystical night. She crouched down beside the spectral visitor, feeling the temperature around her drop. "Do not be afraid, child," the little man said, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "My name is Bernard, and I oversee the work here on this most magical of nights." He gestured, and Emily now noticed more of the ghostly sleighs landing up and down the street. The spectral little men stepped soundlessly from their sleighs and approached the houses. As if made of mist themselves, they passed through walls and fences like ghosts. Behind the frosty windows, Emily glimpsed trees glittering with lights and colorfully wrapped gifts appear beneath them as if by magic. The spectral visitors were spreading their Yuletide enchantment through every home, unseen and unfelt except in the joy they brought. "But our powers are not without limits," Bernard said gravely, drawing Emily's attention back. "The shadow you met threatens all we hold dear. Will you once again aid us, brave child?" Emily thought of the removal men trapped in their perpetual winter's eve, their hopes and cheer lost to the shadow's corruption. She could not let the same fate befall these kindly spirits. Meeting Bernard's hopeful gaze, she nodded. "Tell me what to do." Bernard instructed her to retrieve the crystal bell from the abandoned workshop in the haunted wood. Though Emily's heart quailed at the thought of returning to that ominous tower, she knew it was the only way. Wrapping her coat tight, she slipped into the dark forest, following the faint silvery sleigh tracks through the snow. The trees themselves seemed to peer down at her menacingly as she walked, their branches clawing at her like bony fingers. Gasping puffs of frost, she hurried onward, eyes fixed ahead. At last Emily reached the frozen pond and its ghostly workshop rising up from the ice. She steeled herself and climbed the icy stairs once more up to the topmost chamber. As Emily crept inside, she saw moonlight streaming through the tall arched windows to fall upon the crystal bell in the room's center. Emily slowly approached the bell, feeling its power thrumming through the frigid air. She reached out a tentative hand and lifted the surprisingly heavy object from its stand. Holding the bell carefully, she descended the icy tower and hurried back through the woods before her nerves could fail her. In the town square, she found Bernard waiting beside the great clock just as he had instructed. As the clock began to chime midnight, he nodded encouragingly to her. Hands shaking, Emily raised the bell and rang it 12 times, filling the silent square with its clear, cold tones. At each peal, the bell flared with brilliant light, sending out waves that passed through the village. All across the snowy rooftops, the ghostly sleighs froze in their tracks, tiny reindeer rearing back. As the light enveloped them, each spirit transformed into an orb of pure, glimmering energy. Like a swirling river, the orbs all streaked back through the air toward Emily. Drawn by the crystal bell's call, they poured into its interior, the bell chiming louder with each one it reclaimed. As the final orb vanished within, the bell glowed with a warm, gentle light. Bernard smiled proudly at Emily. Now we shall rest peacefully until called again when the season returns. You have saved us, brave child. He laid a tiny hand upon the bell before disappearing into the night. Utterly exhausted by her ordeal, Emily stumbled home to her bed. She placed the now silent crystal flower into her bedside drawer for safekeeping. Nestled under her blankets once more, Emily soon fell into a tranquil sleep, the spirits now truly free and protected. Chapter 10: Light Returns to Yuletide Hollow. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight glittering off the freshly fallen snow that had accumulated overnight. Emily stirred awake, blinking away the fading memory of the intense, vivid dreams that had filled her sleep. As she glanced around her cozy bedroom, she noticed the glistening winter flower still sitting in her drawer, and the previous night's magical events suddenly came rushing back to her. Downstairs, Emily could hear the cheerful sounds of her family already gathered and celebrating around the grand, majestic Christmas tree, its colorful lights twinkling merrily. Emily eagerly joined them, embracing the coziness of her warm slippers and soft pajamas, as well as the delicious smells wafting from the oven, cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate topped with heaping piles of whipped cream. She almost mentioned the strange, supernatural events from the night before involving the winter spirits, but halted herself, realizing her family would probably not believe or understand. After feasting excitedly on stacks of light, fluffy pancakes shaped festively like Christmas trees and stockings, Emily met up with her best friends Peter and Sarah at their favorite sledding hill just outside of town. Squealing and laughing joyfully, they raced down the slopes together on their slick sleds, their spirits high with friendship and the thrill of the holiday season. Snowball fights and giant snowmen ensued, filling their day with simple childlike delights. As evening fell and dusk crept over the snowy village, the residents of Yuletide Hollow gathered merrily in the town square for an evening of beloved caroling and merriment. Emily kept glancing around, half expecting to spot an elusive wisp or some other spectral winter spirit making an appearance. But only the familiar jovial families and cozy couples of the village filled the square, their faces glowing in the dazzling lights of the Christmas tree. Yet as the villagers raised their voices together in song under the warm glow of the street lamps, kindling warmth and community against winter's icy chill, Emily sensed the spirits were still there, invisible but enriching the festive atmosphere with their ancient magic. Linking arms affectionately with her family and friends, Emily's heart swelled with joy and deep satisfaction. By protecting the sprites, she had protected the true light, meaning, and spirit of Christmas, which shone brighter than ever this year in the little town of Yuletide Hollow.